Good evening, YouTube. October 6th is the anniversary of the passing of Eddie Van Halen. He passed back in 2020, and it was a very sad day for myself as a lifelong fan, and I'm sure for the guitar community and the music community at large. Van Halen, they had so many fans all throughout the years, not just guitar players, of course, but fans of all types. And when that happened in 2020, it was the first time, we had to say to ourselves, Van Halen is no more. And it was a sad reality. But thinking about him coming up to the anniversary here, I wanted to put together a little list of my favorite things off Van Halen 1, because that's my favorite album. I've talked about it at length in a couple of videos. My favorite sound, my favorite riffs. Eddie was, I felt, his loosest. He was slippery. He was all over the neck. And it was so much fun listening to the album and then starting to learn the stuff as I developed as a guitar player. So this is kind of my top 10 things on the album. Not necessarily licks or riffs, but they could be tricks, just sounds, a solo section, anything like that. My top 10 things that I took from Van Halen 1, the album, and things that I like to try and apply to my own playing. So here we go, number 10. On Running with the Devil, I love the way he takes the chords that he uses these chords in so many songs. So many great Van Halen classics are built on those chords, and in this case, he takes the same idea way up here, and he builds a solo section on it. I love the way it's like, arpeggiated. It fits so well with the song. It was such a nice idea. So I'm going to give it my best shot here, see what it sounds like. Yeah, so he takes that chord idea and he brings it up here, he arpeggiates it, and then he adds the little tails here for the rest of that. I love that solo. It's such a good break, and it's one of my favorite solos off the album. Not technically challenging, but it sounds great, and it works. Number 9 is a little natural harmonic trick he does during the intro to On Fire. So he uses the 5th fret harmonics on the low E string, the A string, and the high E string. And it's during the intro, and when he does this, the whole track cuts out. He cuts to this little part. Sounds cool. It's very impactful. So it sounds like this. And then it goes into the riff there. So he's using those 3 harmonics, and it was pretty hard. Back in the day, I couldn't move my picking hand that fast, so I did figure out that this same harmonic, if you go on a D string right above the 3rd fret, it lives right there too. So I used to do it like this. Yeah, but my picking hand got faster over the years, and it does sound better. That harmonic sounds more crisp and clean if you do it up here. So it's a cool little trick he does. He uses harmonics all over the album in different ways. So this is just one example. I love it. Love it as part of that intro. So thought it was great. Number 8 is the main riff to Little Dreamer. I love the way he combines, individual fretted notes with the chords, and we were just talking about these chords. We were just talking about those chords, and here's a great song that's written using those chords. So it's just a cool, slow, bluesy lick. Shows a lot of different flavor in Eddie's playing. There's so much variety on the album. It's not just all blazing fast, craziness. There's all kinds of good stuff. Different tempos, and this is one of these riffs that just stuck with me just because of the groove. The whole song's just got this great groove, and I think it's based mostly around this riff. It's just another great piece by Eddie. Cool riff to play. It's fun fun to play. It feels good. The song feels so good. It goes so nicely. It's just another great piece of writing by Eddie, and it's why it's on this list. Number 7 is the phasing trick that he does on the intro to Atomic Punk. So it's a cool little trick. He started using that phaser for all his leads and stuff, and it just transformed the sound. It ended up doing so much. It's part of why it's one of my favorite sounds, or my favorite sound, I should say. But he does this thing where he kicks it on, and all he does is he's scratching over the strings with the phasing in the background. It just sounds like some crazy sci-fi stuff. And there's a part to it where it's all doubled up and it's sped up. I believe he's using a slapback delay for that. So he quickly taps on his slapback delay, and it doubles up the scratching a couple of points in the intro. I couldn't get any of the delays in these HX stomps to do that thing, so I've kind of just been doing it, manually, just doubling up the speed. You'll see what I'm doing, but it sounds like this. It's just a cool little trick he does. Another example of all these crazy innovative things he does. And then it kicks off into the riff. So it's just a cool thing. Like I said, there's sounds on here that I love, and just things that inspired me, things that, made me want to try my own crazy stuff with effects. So this is another one. I love it. Number 6 is the intro riff to I'm the One. I think this is probably the first example of, this aggressive syncopated picking that Eddie does in a number of songs. Hot for Teacher being another one of them. So he does this cool thing. His timing is so good. I kind of got the technique down. It took me a long time of just going slow and building myself up. I think I got it pretty decently for this riff. There's a couple tricks to this riff. There's 2 little breaking points in a riff. The first part is where he does one of these crazy techniques where he's pulling off to open strings. So really slowly it sounds like this. And really fast, it's just crazy. I can nail it sometimes, but more often than not, I'm a little sloppy. But let me play the whole riff and get through it, and you'll hear it. You'll hear these little parts. It's just aggressive. It's nasty. It's just I love this style of Eddie's playing when he's doing stuff like this. So there, the intro is so cool. It uses that syncopated picking, and I gave that pull off to open string with my best shot. It was a little sloppy, but it kind of made it in there. And then the second kind of alternate part of the riff is just the harmonics, And then he usually adds that with the whammy bar there. So it's just a great riff, and I love the way that technique made its way onto later albums. Hot for Teacher is another one of my favorite songs of theirs of all time, for the same reason. It's so aggressive. When Eddie's picking like that, he's just cooking, and I love that song for that reason. Number 5 is the first lick in the first solo to I'm the One. So it's got this triplet thing where he's got the phaser engaged, and he's going over the triplets over and over again at one point. And with the phasing, it just sounds so cool. He's just such a sharp, precise player. I've worked on this part for a long time. I can play it kind of, most of the time, but it still needs some work. It's just such a crazy riff, and it just goes to show you the level of expertise and virtuosity that Eddie was displaying, at 20 some odd years old, maybe not even, playing riffs like this with ease. So I'm going to give it a shot. You'll hear what it sounds like. So I got the phaser engaged for this part. It goes like this. So really, I'm just talking about this first part here. So it's so hard to play at full speed. So really, I'll go a little slower, and you'll hear exactly what it's supposed to sound like. Actually, he bends there. That's the hard part of the riff. You know, the rest is not so bad because you're doing the same thing over and over again. But when he goes into that, you know, little line there, that's pretty hard. So at full speed, I kind of slop through it most of the time. But as long as you get kind of those triplets in the right place, you can get the feel for it pretty good. It's just a cool thing he does. It's a great riff to practice and work on your technique for, you know, maybe 3-note per string, you know, fast parts like that. So it's a great part. I love it. You know, again, part of one of my favorite songs of all time. Number 4 is the intro to Ain't Talking About Love. I like it. It's a great, unique idea. It's the first time Eddie uses his flanger, I think, in a big way. We see the same use of the flanger, even made more so famous on Unchained when he does the, you know, the momentary flanger thing. But on here, it adds a little spice to the end of the lick. It's a great lick. We'll hear what it sounds like here. So there's no phaser, but the flanger is being kicked on, you know, at the end when he does a little. And that's the other important thing about this riff. You want to make sure at the end of it, right before the end, you nail the G instead of an A. Some people go. It's actually. So you want to make sure you hit that. So I'll go through the riff a couple times and I'll use the flanger to hear what it sounds like. So I love that use there, and I love the way he takes it even a bigger way, uses it on Unchained, you know, a couple albums later. So it's a great riff. Eddie's using, you know, he's an innovative ideas. Again, innovative with the effects, so that's another reason why I love this one. It's another great one. Number 3 is Eddie's use of the whammy bar. So he does all sorts of cool tricks all over the album, from bar dives to, you know, accents when he's playing along the neck. He's just one of the first innovators, you know. Back in the early 80s, Eddie was the first to use everything, you know, from the old Floyds with no locking nut. You know, even before that, he was doing whatever he can to try and keep a strat bar in tune. But, you know, the Floyd Rose and Eddie Van Halen kind of came up together, largely because of the way he was playing. You know, I think he had a lot to do with the development of that. And, you know, it's another thing we can thank him for, I believe, if you really connected all the dots. So I just want to do a couple examples. First being, you know, the classic dive bomb. Eddie typically, oftentimes, would often slide up the neck prior to the dive, so it would go something like this. Instead of just going... I think it gives it a lot more flavor, a lot more attitude when you do it like that. So that's a cool one. He does other stuff like... right before the solo in I'm the One, he does this cool thing where he does octaves. And stuff like that. And of course then he does all the stuff with the tailing on of the harmonics. Other people would go on to use that in a bigger way too. You know, Dimebag, who is self-proclaimed, you know, Eddie was basically his number one influence. He would do the same stuff years later. You know, he would just, you know, do more with that same technique. But it started with Eddie. He was the first guy doing this stuff, so it was cool stuff. He did it in all the right ways on the album. Of course, you can really abuse a whammy bar if you're not careful, but Eddie was tasteful and aggressive, which made him one of the greats. Number two is Eddie's tremolo picking. So he did a lot of cool stuff. Of course, the famous line interruption. And then the rest of that. But he started there, and he does stuff like that all throughout different various solos if you listen closely. And it's a great technique. It's a great way to start a solo. Do something like that in the middle of a solo, like he does there in Eruption. There's so many good ways to use that technique. And Eddie, I think, again, was one of the first ones back in that day doing a lot with this. Of course, it got copied, and everyone was doing fast tremolo picking by the mid-'80s. But he did it in a great, tasteful way, all the way going back to the late '70s. So another innovation here, and I think we all use this, and it all comes from Eddie. Okay, and finally number one, and you probably guessed it, but it's the old tapping or right-hand hammer-ons, depending on what you like to call it. But of course, he made it famous in Eruption, and I can't even think of the number of songs and different ways he's used that same technique throughout all the albums in different ways. And it was such a cool thing. It's been said that people before him have used, hammered on the fretboard with the right hand and whatnot, but he's the one that really took off in this big musical way, and he started to develop all these different things, whether you're talking about Spanish Fly or Eruption or Hot for Teacher, all these different licks that he does all throughout the entire span of Van Halen. So, I'll just do a couple examples. I just love the tail end of Eruption, right before the little dive bomb effect there. You're really not supposed to do that with a whammy bar. I usually do that with a slide, but I think Eddie actually used a delay for that, an old-fashioned analog delay, to where if you have it on and you start messing with the rate, it'll change the pitch. But that's of course a famous example. The rest of Eruption, he does it in so many different ways. I just love the technique. Everyone loves the technique. It's another thing by the mid-'80s. Everyone was doing it. There was a couple guys that kind of took it in their own cool direction. Red Beach, he had a lot of cool licks. Vito Bratta, of course. Guys like that built on it, but everyone was doing it, whether they were doing it well or not, by the mid-'80s. But again, another thing that we can all thank Eddie Van Halen for. It's almost kind of, played itself out of, the guitar community these days, but, your average layperson, if they're not, involved in playing guitar and gear, you put on Eruption, they're going to be amazed. So it still hits home. All the things he did way back then, it's still fresh today as it was back in the late '70s. So it's all good stuff. And again, the right hand hammer-ons, the tapping stuff is probably his most famous thing, and it's for a good reason. It's a great sounding technique. He made it sound so beautiful and so musical in so many different ways. So that's the list. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you learned a little something about Eddie Van Halen. I hope so. But I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great night.